Part 3, The Law of Logical Analysis. You are now invited to consider that important law of logical reasoning known as the law of logical analysis. This law represents the universal experience of human thought rationally applied and directed. The law of logical analysis is expressed in the first of the 7 axioms of logical reasoning, which is as follows. The axiom of logical analysis: everything is composed, constituted and made up of a. Parts, elements and factors, and b. Qualities, properties and attributes, which in combination, arrangement, correlation and coordination constitute its character and make it just what it is, and into which it may be analyzed, dissected and separated in thought. This axiom states a truth which is verified by all human experience, is supported by the common sense reports of the race, and is substantiated by the judgment of the keenest logical and philosophical thought. It is to be regarded as a self-evident truth, and as a proposition which may be taken for granted. It is assumed in all logical thought, and is implied in all true reasoning. The following consideration is not intended to be offered as proof of its truth, but is designed merely to elucidate and make clear the manifestation of this principle in the world of thought and things. Our consideration properly begins with a definition of the term thing, as employed in this axiom. Let us come to an understanding of the meaning of this important term. By so doing, we reduce the risk of misunderstanding in the course of this instruction. Inasmuch as the greater part of all disputes arise from misunderstanding of, and non-agreement upon, the principal terms employed in the reasoning, it is important that an agreement of this kind be reached at the beginning of an argument or other process of reasoning. This will serve to explain the frequent resort to definitions which you will discover in the course of this instruction. A thing, in the present usage of the term, is any separate and distinguishable object of thought. The term separate, as employed in this definition, means distinct, apart from others. The terms distinguishable, as employed in this definition, means capable of being set apart from others by visible marks, signs, or characteristics, or capable of definition of terms, or logical division. A more technical definition of thing is whatever exists, or may be conceived to exist, as a separate, concrete entity, or as a specific, particular object of thought. In this category of things are contained all objects of which we have, or can have any practical knowledge through the senses, or through thought employing the material furnished by the senses. If there are any entities outside of this category, we do not and cannot know them in the way in which we know the things of ordinary experience. Parts, elements, and factors. Now for the definitions of the 3 terms employed in that clause of the axiom following the symbol A, viz., parts, elements, and factors. A part is a constituent portion of a whole, a portion less than the whole of a thing. An element is one of the essential parts or principles of which anything is composed, and upon which its distinctive character is based. A factor is one of the elements of a thing, which when multiplied or combined constitutes that product which is the whole of the thing. It will require but little thought on your part to convince you that everything you have ever experienced, or can imagine yourself as experiencing, is composed, constituted, and made up of parts, elements, and factors, and is subject to physical or mental analysis into such. You can form no idea of a concrete, definite thing as being devoid of parts, elements or factors. Your imagination, as well as your reason, will find itself unable to form a conception of such a thing for you. Even if you were to find yourself able to conceive of such a thing, you would not be able to find words and terms with which to express the thought. The principle of composition and analysis is illustrated by the ancient Buddhistic story of the dialogue between a sage and the king who was visiting him. The sage asked the king, "What do you mean when you think or speak of your chariot?" The king replied, "When I think or speak of my chariot, I mean my vehicle, which is composed of the body, the wheels, the axle, and the pole." Again the question was asked, "What do you mean when you think and speak of a river?" The answer was, "When I think and speak of a river, I mean its flowing water, its bed, and its bank." The sage then asked the king, "Do the body, the wheels, the axle, and the pole of the chariot, taken apart from one another, represent your thought and idea of a chariot? Do the flowing water, the river bed, the river banks, taken apart from one another, represent your thought and idea of a river?" The king replied, "Nay, Reverend sir, these things, apart from one another and not joined together, are naught but separate and distinct things, and when in that condition constitute neither the chariot nor the river. In such case there is no chariot and no river to be perceived and known to my mind. Then asked the sage, can you think of a chariot or of a river without including in your thought these parts which constitute it? Nay, sir, I cannot think of either chariot or river in this way. When I attempt it I find myself thinking of nothing, or of a mere word or name. Then, said the sage, can you think of a chariot or a river by thinking merely of the separated parts which when combined constitute them? Nay, reverend sir, replied the king, when I try to do so I find myself thinking merely of separate and disconnected parts, and not of the chariot or the river at all. In such case, as before, I find that to me the chariot and the river are mere words or names, and have no present real existence at all. Then, asked the sage, tell me of what your real thought of the chariot and of the river must consist of. What is it composed of? What is it made up? Reverend sir, replied the king, I find that my real thought of the chariot, and of the river, is composed, constituted, and made up of my several ideas of their various parts, and of my idea of the combination, correlation and coordination of those parts of those several parts existing, and being assembled, arranged, and put together in a certain fashion. Good, said the sage, you have now discovered for yourself the true nature of all things. Everything of which you can think is so composed, constituted and made up. So are the several parts, elements and factors put together in a certain fashion, and acting in combination, coordination and correlation. Thus the ancient sage, employing the Socratic method of delivering the mind of its thought by means of asking leading questions, taught to the king the lesson of the true nature of things, and thoughts of things. You may employ this method in the way of applying the general principle to anything and everything which is the subject or object of your actual experience, and which is the result of your processes of perception and conception. All percepts and all concepts are made up or put together parts, elements and factors of thought, as you have seen in the preceding section of this book, and, being so, they are each and all subject to analysis and resolution into such constituent elements. In considering the subject of composition and analysis, however, you must not lose sight of the important part played in it by their respective forms of arrangement and correlation present in the putting together of the several elements, parts, or factors of a thing. For instance, there are many chemical elements, harmless in themselves, or harmless when combined in certain proportions, which are poisonous when combined in certain other proportions. The same is true concerning explosives. For instance, nitroglycerin is composed of two harmless and non-explosive materials, which when combined in certain proportions produce the high explosive. Formulas must include not only the constituent elements, but also the proportions in which these must be combined. Carbon, in different forms, produces the diamond, charcoal, and other substances manifesting widely different appearances. From some 70 or 80 chemical elements, combined in different proportions, all the countless number of organic and inorganic material substances are made up and constituted. In considering the principle of composition, the associated principles of correlation, i.e., mutual or reciprocal relation, and coordination, i.e., common and harmonious action, movement or condition, must be also taken into consideration. The phenomena of composition consists not only of the putting together, but also of the arrangement observed in the putting together. The law of composition and analysis manifests in the mental as well as in the physical field. In every field of physics or psychology it is found manifest. No exceptions have thus far been discovered. All apparent exceptions are ultimately found unquestionably coming under the rule. Qualities, properties and attributes. Now for the definitions of the three terms, employed in that clause of our axiom following the symbol, B, viz., qualities, properties and attributes. A quality is, anything that makes, or helps to make, anything such as it is a distinguishing property, characteristic or attribute. A property is, a peculiar quality of a thing, a distinctive attribute, an inherent and naturally essential characteristic of anything. An attribute is, an inherent quality, essential property, or characteristic disposition. In the preceding section of this book, you have seen that in the act or process of perception you recognize certain sensory reports, arising from contact with external objects, as being associated with those particular objects and interpret them as representing certain qualities, properties or attributes inherent and abiding in those objects. In a percept, as you have discovered, you regard the perceived elements as representing qualities of the perceived object, these being incorporated into a group, giving the impression of a single and unitary whole, which is regarded as constituting the idea and meaning of that object. Therefore, your percept of a particular object is composed and made up or put together separate perceptions arising from separate sensations. Likewise, the object represented by your percept is regarded as being composed and made up of the put together particular qualities, properties and attributes which are represented by the perceptive elements which constitute your completed percept. Illustration: when you perceive a particular orange placed before you, you become conscious of a number of sensations arising by reason of the presence of the orange, and of its contact with your sensory organism. These several sensations being recognized, interpreted, and associated with that orange, are transformed into perceptive elements, and combined in your completed percept of that orange. Your percept, then, is composed and made up of several elements, each of which represents a particular quality, property or attribute of that orange. In the illustrative figure on the next page, we have 1. A circle representing your percept of that particular orange, and 2. A number of smaller circles included in the limits of the larger one, each of which represents the perceptive element associated with some particular quality, property or attitude of the orange, viz. A. Its form, B. Its weight, C. Its hardness or softness, D. Its color, E. Its fragrance, F. Its taste, G. Its size. Each of these respective perceptive element is called a simple percept. Their fusion and union into the particular idea of that orange constitutes a complex percept technically known as a percept, such as has been described to you: form, color, size, minor attributes, taste, weight, hardness, fragrance. You should note here the important fact that you are able to distinguish between one object of thought and other such objects, between one perceived thing and other such things, solely by reason of your perception of the differences in the respective qualities, properties and attributes of the several objects or things. You distinguish and discriminate between objects and things solely by reason of your perception of their distinctive respective characters. The character of anything, i.e., that peculiar quality, or the sum of qualities, by which a person or thing is distinguished from others, is composed and made up of characteristics. Characteristics. The term characteristics means distinguishing traits, qualities, attributes or properties. In the category of characteristics are found not only the qualities, properties and attributes which we have just considered, but also the parts, elements and factors in their arrangement, correlations and coordinations, which we considered a little further back in this section of this book. The characteristics of a thing make it just what it is, that particular thing, as distinguished from other particular things. External characteristics. In addition to the characteristics, i.e., the qualities, properties and attributes, the parts, elements and factors, which we have considered in these pages, there are certain quasi-characteristics of things which some thinkers would include in the category of characteristics or attributes. These quasi-characteristics compose a class of relation attributes, i.e., attributes denoting the relations known as contiguity of time, space, and cause and effect which the object bears to other things or objects. These relation attributes are often called the external characteristics of the object or thing. Example: A. The relation of cause and effect existing between two things. B. The relation of nearness or distance in space between two things. C. The relation of nearness or distance in time between two things. The quasi-characteristics, or external characteristics, while properly belonging to an object or things, nevertheless are not true characteristics, such as the internal characteristics which we have previously described in the pages. The internal characteristics, i.e., the parts, elements and factors, the qualities, properties and attributes, of a thing, are essentially connected with the inner nature of that thing, while the external characteristics depend not upon the inner nature of the thing, but, instead, upon the external conditions under which the thing exists. By conditions is meant the state, circumstances, or relative position in or under which anything exists. We shall consider the subject of external characteristics in the following section of this book, which is devoted to the examination of the law of logical synthesis. We believe this to be the more logical method of treating that particular subject, inasmuch as it is involved in a perception, rather than in perception.